My son said I was too old-fashioned, too stubborn, and too out of touch. So he dismissed everything I taught him, called my values outdated, and treated my wisdom like trash from a yard sale. But I wasn't obsolete. I wasn't irrelevant. While he thought my old ways had expired, I was planning to show him that some lessons never go out of style, and the most important ones have a way of coming back around when you least expect them. Marcus thought he could upgrade his life by downgrading his mother, but he was about to learn that some software updates come with a price he couldn't afford to pay. I raised Marcus with my grandmother's recipes, my mother's prayers, and my father's work ethic. After his daddy walked out when Marcus was 7, it was just me and him in that little kitchen, learning life through measuring cups and moral stories. I taught him to save every penny, to treat people with respect regardless of their station, to keep his word like it was gospel, and to never forget where he came from. Those weren't just lessons. They were survival skills wrapped in love. I worked double shifts at the textile mill to keep food on our table and clothes on his back. My hands were always stained with fabric dye, always rough from handling industrial thread, but they were gentle when I helped him with homework at our second-hand kitchen table. I showed him how to balance a checkbook before he could drive, how to cook a full meal before he graduated high school, how to treat women with dignity by watching how I expected to be treated. Every skill I taught him came from necessity, from years of making do and making it work. When Marcus got his scholarship to business school, I cried tears of pride in that empty house. I'd saved every extra dollar for 4 years, sold my mama's china set, and worked Christmas shifts so he could have spending money without taking on debt. The night before he left, I packed his suitcase with homemade cookies, hand-knitted sweaters, and a photo of us from his high school graduation. Education is the one thing nobody can take from you, I told him. But don't let it make you forget who raised you. He hugged me tight and promised he wouldn't. That was the boy I loved, the boy I'd given everything to create. But college changed him. Not just his vocabulary or his clothes, but his heart. He came home talking about modern business practices and outdated thinking, like everything I'd taught him was something to outgrow. When I suggested he save his money instead of leasing that expensive car, he laughed. "Mama, that's old school thinking. You've got to spend money to make money." When I reminded him to call his elderly neighbor who'd been kind to us when times were hard, he said, "I don't have time for all that small-town courtesy stuff." It broke my heart, but I thought it was just a phase, something he'd grow out of once the real world taught him what I couldn't. The first crack came during Sunday dinner when Marcus brought home his new girlfriend, Stephanie, a lawyer with sharp suits and sharper opinions. I'd spent all morning cooking his favorite meal: fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, and sweet potato pie. When I set the table with my good plates and cloth napkins, Stephanie whispered something to Marcus that made him chuckle. "Mama," he said, "you don't have to go through all this trouble. We could have just ordered something." I smiled and said I enjoyed cooking for family. Stephanie looked around our modest dining room and said, "It's so quaint, like stepping back in time." The way she said quaint felt like she was describing a museum exhibit. During dinner, I mentioned that I'd been volunteering at the food bank, something I'd done for 20 years. Marcus barely looked up from his phone. "That's nice, Mama," he said absently, scrolling through emails. When I asked about his job, he launched into a speech about disrupting traditional markets and eliminating inefficiencies. I didn't understand half the words, but I understood the tone. Everything old was wrong. Everything new was brilliant. When I tried to share a story about helping a family at the food bank, Stephanie interrupted with a work anecdote about a high-stakes merger. The conversation moved on without me. The second betrayal came when I offered to help him with his finances. I'd been managing money carefully my whole life, stretching dollars until they screamed, and I'd noticed Marcus seemed stressed about his bills. "Honey, I could look over your budget with you," I suggested. "I've gotten pretty good at making ends meet." He actually rolled his eyes. "Mama, your way of doing things worked 50 years ago. The economy is different now. You wouldn't understand modern financial planning." He said it like I was a child offering to help with calculus. The dismissal stung, especially since I knew he was struggling with credit card debt and car payments that ate up half his salary. The third betrayal was the worst. I'd saved up to give Marcus a down payment for a house. $5,000 I'd been putting away for 3 years, skipping meals and mending clothes until they couldn't be mended anymore. When I presented him with the check, I expected gratitude. Instead, he shook his head. "Mama, $5,000 isn't going to make a difference in today's real estate market. Besides, I'm not ready to settle down in some little starter home. I'm thinking bigger." He handed the check back like it was Monopoly money. That $5,000 represented 15-hour workdays and skipped meals. To him it was pocket change, an embarrassing reminder of my small-scale thinking. The breaking point came at Marcus's company Christmas party. He'd invited me, said it would be nice for his colleagues to meet his mother. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one with the pearl buttons I'd bought for his college graduation. I was proud to be there, proud of the successful man my son had become. I'd brought homemade cookies, the same recipe I'd been making for 20 years, the ones Marcus used to beg for as a child. But from the moment we walked in, I felt his embarrassment radiating off him like heat. When his boss complimented the homemade cookies I'd brought, Marcus jumped in quickly. "My mother loves to bake. She's very traditional." The way he said traditional sounded like an apology. When a coworker asked about my work, Marcus answered for me. "She's retired now. From a different era, you know." He might as well have introduced me as a historical artifact. The evening got worse from there. During cocktails, I tried to make conversation with Stephanie's friends, but they looked through me like I was furniture. When someone mentioned a news story, I offered my perspective based on my volunteer work with struggling families. Stephanie actually laughed. "That's so sweet," she said, "but these are complex economic issues. They require more sophisticated analysis than grassroots charity work." Marcus nodded along, agreeing with her dismissal of everything I'd learned from 40 years of real-world experience. The final straw came when Stephanie started telling a story about her own mother, a successful surgeon. "I don't know what I'd do if my mom tried to give me outdated advice about my career," she laughed. "Some people just can't adapt to modern life." She glanced at me when she said it, and Marcus actually nodded in agreement. "Right. My mom still thinks you can get ahead just by working hard and being nice to people. It's sweet but not realistic." I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in that fancy mirror, seeing a woman who'd been reduced to a quaint anachronism in her own son's life. Here was my son, the boy I'd raised with my sweat and sacrifice, agreeing with his girlfriend that I was some kind of relic. I'd given him everything I had, and he was ashamed of where it came from. In that moment, something cold and sharp settled in my chest. If he thought my old ways were expired, maybe it was time to show him what happens when they truly disappear from his life. I didn't say a word on the drive home from that party. Marcus tried to make small talk, but I just stared out the window thinking. When he dropped me off, he said, "Thanks for coming tonight, Mama. You looked nice." I smiled and said, "Thank you, honey. I had a real educational evening." He didn't catch the steel underneath my politeness, but he would soon enough. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a legal pad, making a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but an inventory. Every single thing I'd done for Marcus over the past year. The meals I'd cooked when he was too tired to eat properly, the laundry I'd picked up when he was swamped at work, the emergency loan when his car needed repairs, the birthday check, the Christmas gifts, the constant emotional support and encouragement. The list filled 3 pages. Then I made another list. Every old-fashioned value he'd dismissed. Hard work, frugality, loyalty, respect for elders, keeping your word, taking care of family, being grateful for what you have, treating people with dignity regardless of their status. All the lessons I'd tried to teach him, all the wisdom he thought had expired. These weren't outdated concepts. They were the foundation of a decent life. I pulled out my address book, the actual paper kind that Marcus always teased me about. "Mama, Why don't you just put everyone's number in your phone? Because phones break, I'd always said, but paper lasts. I started making calls. First to my sister Dorothy, then to my neighbor Mrs. Chin, then to my friend Louise from church. Not to complain, just to reconnect. To remember who I was before I became someone my own son was embarrassed to claim. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at myself honestly in the mirror and decided that if Marcus thought I was out of date, then maybe it was time to update my priorities. If he didn't want my old-fashioned help, then I'd give him the modern independence he claimed to value so much. But independence, I knew from experience, was a teacher that didn't offer makeup exams. I started with the small things, the daily kindnesses Marcus had come to expect without even noticing. When he called asking if I could pick up his dry cleaning because he was swamped at work, I said, "Oh honey, I don't want to interfere with your modern efficiency systems. I'm sure you'll figure it out." He laughed, thinking I was joking, but the dry cleaning stayed at the shop until he found time to get it himself. When he showed up at dinner time expecting a home-cooked meal like he had every Sunday for the past 2 years, he found me dressed to go out. "Where are you going, Mama?" he asked, confused. "Out to dinner with Dorothy," I said. "You always said my cooking was too old-fashioned anyway. I figured you'd prefer to experience some modern cuisine." The look of confusion on his face was priceless, but I kept my expression neutral. He ended up eating a frozen dinner alone while I enjoyed pot roast and conversation with people who appreciated both. The next week, when his expensive car broke down and he called asking if I could loan him money for repairs like I'd done 3 times before, I paused thoughtfully. "Marcus, honey, my old-fashioned budgeting methods are so outdated. I wouldn't want to interfere with your modern financial planning. I'm sure someone with your business education can figure out a contemporary solution." I could hear the frustration in his voice when he realized I was serious. He ended up having to take out a costly short-term loan at an interest rate that made my old-fashioned savings account look brilliant. Meanwhile, I started redirecting all the energy I'd been putting into Marcus toward other people who actually valued it. I began volunteering more at the food bank, taking on additional shifts and training new volunteers. I started a cooking class for young mothers at the community center, teaching them how to stretch grocery budgets and make healthy meals from scratch. These women hung on my every word, grateful for knowledge that could help feed their families better for less money. Mrs. Chen's grandson Kevin started coming over after school. His parents worked late and he was struggling with math. I helped him with homework using the same patient methods I'd used with Marcus 20 years ago. Within a month, his grades improved dramatically. His parents were so grateful they brought me flowers every week and invited me to his school honors ceremony. "You're like a miracle worker," his mother said. "Kevin says you make learning fun." It felt good to be appreciated again, to remember what it was like when someone valued what I had to offer. I also started attending a senior citizens investment club that met at the library. Turns out my outdated approach to saving money was exactly what several other retirees needed to hear. We shared strategies for living well on fixed incomes, and I discovered that my decades of experience making dollars stretch had given me genuine expertise. The group elected me treasurer within 3 months, trusting me to manage their modest but growing fund with the same care I'd always applied to my own finances. 3 months into my new approach, Marcus called with panic in his voice. "Mama, I need to ask you a huge favor. Stephanie's parents are coming for dinner next weekend and I told them I'd cook. I don't really know how to make anything impressive, and this is really important for my relationship. Could you maybe help me plan something?" I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, looking out at the garden I'd been tending since he was in high school. "Oh, sweetheart," I said gently, "I wouldn't want my outdated cooking methods to embarrass you in front of Stephanie's sophisticated parents. Maybe you could look up some modern recipes online." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, "Mama, I really need your help here. I don't know what I'm doing." His voice had taken on a tone I hadn't heard since he was 12 and had volunteered to make dinner for my birthday without knowing how to cook anything more complex than cereal. Marcus, honey, you've spent months telling me that my way of doing things is expired. I'd hate to set you back with my old-fashioned approach to hospitality. Please, Mama. I'm desperate. The word hung in the air between us. I could picture him in his expensive apartment with his granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, surrounded by all the modern conveniences money could buy, and completely helpless to create something as basic as a decent meal. I tell you what, I said finally. If you really want my help, then you need to understand what you're asking for. You're not just asking for recipes. You're asking for a lifetime of knowledge about making people feel welcome, about creating something beautiful from simple ingredients, about caring enough to put real effort into showing love through food. That's not modern or outdated. It's timeless. But if you want it, you have to respect it. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller than I'd heard in years. I respect it, Mama. I've been an ass. I need your help, and not just with dinner. Something in his tone told me this conversation was about more than menu planning. All right, I said. Come over Saturday morning. We'll start from scratch. That weekend, I went to Marcus's apartment and found it was exactly what I expected. Expensive furniture with no soul, a kitchen that looked like a showroom because it never got used, and a man who'd forgotten how to create anything meaningful with his own hands. The refrigerator contained takeout containers, energy drinks, and condiments that had expired months ago. I didn't lecture him. I just started teaching. We spent Saturday shopping together, and I showed him how to select the best ingredients without spending a fortune, how to build relationships with vendors who'd remember your face and give you the good stuff, how to plan a meal that considers your guests' tastes and dietary needs. It's not about the money you spend, I explained as we picked through vegetables at the farmer's market. It's about the thought you put in. These vendors can tell the difference between someone who cares about quality and someone who's just grabbing whatever's convenient. At the butcher shop, I watched Marcus fumble through a conversation about cuts of meat, clearly out of his depth. The butcher, an older Italian man named Tony, looked at me with understanding eyes. Your son? He asked. I nodded. First time cooking for the in-laws? Another nod. Tony smiled and pulled out a beautiful roast. For you, Mrs. Dolores, I said. For you, Mrs. Dolores, I give him the good stuff. But he better learn to appreciate what Mama knows. Marcus looked embarrassed, but he was paying attention. Sunday was cooking day. I taught him how to make my grandmother's pot roast, the one that had been feeding our family for 3 generations. As he struggled to get the timing right, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning, I remembered all the Sunday afternoons he'd spent underfoot in my kitchen, asking why this, why that, until I'd finally started letting him help. Somewhere along the way to becoming successful, he'd forgotten how to do anything useful with his hands. The secret isn't in the recipe, I told him as he seasoned the meat with shaking hands. It's in the patience. You can't rush good food any more than you can rush good character. Everything worth having takes time. He was learning to listen again, really listen the way he used to when he was small and thought I knew everything. I was teaching him that maybe I still did know a few things worth learning. Monday evening arrived like a final exam neither of us was sure he'd pass. Stephanie's parents arrived exactly on time. Dr. Patricia Morgan, a cardiothoracic surgeon with silver hair and intelligent eyes, and her husband Robert, a retired federal judge whose handshake suggested he'd spent a lifetime evaluating people's character in 60 seconds or less. They walked into Marcus's apartment expecting to be impressed by his modern lifestyle, but what they found was something different entirely. The table was set with mismatched plates Marcus had borrowed from me, cloth napkins that had been in my family for 40 years, and candles that cast a warm glow over everything. The apartment smelled like Sunday dinner at a grandmother's house, rich and welcoming and real. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Dr. Morgan paused in surprise, her expression softening as she took in the homey atmosphere her daughter's boyfriend had somehow created. The meal Marcus served wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. The pot roast fell apart at the touch of a fork. The vegetables had been roasted until they were caramelized and sweet. The bread was homemade, still warm from the oven, and the apple pie for dessert smelled like heaven and tasted like love. Dr. Morgan took one bite and closed her eyes. "This is extraordinary," she said, looking at Marcus with new respect. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" For a moment, I saw the old Marcus, the one who used to help me in the kitchen and listen to my stories about his great-grandmother's recipes. "My mother taught me," he said, and there wasn't a trace of embarrassment in his voice. "She's been trying to pass down family traditions for years, but I was too proud to listen." He glanced toward the kitchen where I was pretending to clean dishes but really eavesdropping on every word. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Judge Morgan said, cutting another piece of roast. "These old family recipes are treasures. So many young people today don't understand the value of learning from their elders. They think everything old is obsolete, but some things improve with age." His words carried weight, the authority of someone who'd spent decades distinguishing between what was genuinely outdated and what was timelessly valuable. Stephanie, who'd been noticeably quiet all evening, finally spoke up. "Marcus talks about his mother a lot. She sounds remarkable." It was the first time she'd ever said anything positive about me, and I could see Marcus noticing the difference, the way his posture straightened with something that might have been pride. After dinner, Dr. Morgan pulled Marcus aside while Stephanie helped me wrap leftovers. "Son," she said quietly, but I could hear every word from the kitchen, "that meal wasn't just food. It was love on a plate. Whoever taught you to cook like that raised you with real values. Don't ever be ashamed of that." Through the pass-through window, I watched Marcus nod seriously, something fundamental shifting in his expression. The evening ended with hugs all around and an invitation for Marcus and Stephanie to join the Morgans for their annual 4th of July barbecue. "Bring your mother next time," Dr. Morgan told Marcus. "I'd love to meet the woman who taught you to cook like that." As they left, I heard Judge Morgan tell his wife, "That boy was raised right. You can always tell." The next morning, Marcus called me before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. "Mama, can I come over? I want to learn more." "Learn more about what?" I asked, though I thought I knew. "Everything," he said, his voice thick with something that sounded like regret. "I want to learn everything I should have been paying attention to all along." That afternoon, he sat at my kitchen table like he used to when he was little, watching me can vegetables from my garden. I explained the process, the timing, the importance of sterilizing jars properly, the satisfaction of opening home-canned tomatoes in the middle of winter. "Why did you stop helping me?" he asked suddenly. I looked up from the tomatoes I was peeling. "Because you told me my help was worthless. You said my ways were expired." He winced. "I never said worthless. You didn't have to say it, Marcus. When you dismiss someone's entire way of life as outdated, you're saying their value has expired. And I decided that if you didn't want what I had to offer, then I'd offer it to people who did." I gestured toward a thank you card from Kevin's parents that was stuck to my refrigerator. Turns out there are plenty of people who think old-fashioned wisdom still has some use. He was quiet for a long time, watching me work with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd been canning vegetables for 40 years. Finally, "I've been thinking about what Dr. Morgan said. About values. I think I got so caught up in trying to be successful that I forgot what success actually looks like." "What do you think it looks like?" I asked, not looking up from my work. I used to think it was having the right job, the right car, the right girlfriend. But last night, watching Stephanie's parents enjoy that meal, seeing how impressed they were not with my apartment or my salary but with something I'd made with my own hands, I remembered why I used to love helping you cook. It wasn't just about the food. What was it about? It was about creating something good, taking care of people, making them feel loved. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd given him in months. "That's not old-fashioned, baby. That's timeless." Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a regular visitor again, but this time it was different. He didn't show up expecting to be fed and fussed over. He came to learn. I taught him how to make my mother's cornbread, how to balance a budget the way I'd learned during the lean years after his father left, how to treat service workers with respect and dignity because you never know when you might need their kindness yourself. I showed him my volunteer work at the food bank, and he was amazed at how much good could be done with simple organization and genuine care for people. I always thought charity had to be big checks and fancy galas, he said, watching me help a young mother figure out how to make a week's worth of meals from the groceries in her bag. But this is more personal. It's supposed to be personal, I said. When you forget that people aren't just numbers or problems to be solved, you stop being useful to anyone. The real test came when Marcus lost his job. His company was downsizing, eliminating his entire department in favor of automated systems and offshore contractors. He called me in tears, panicking about his lease, his car payment, his credit cards, all the modern financial obligations that seemed so manageable when he had a steady paycheck. The old me would have immediately offered to bail him out. The new me listened quietly and then asked, "What do you think you should do?" "I don't know," he said, his voice breaking. "I've never been unemployed before. I don't know how to live without a steady paycheck. I don't know how to cut expenses or negotiate with creditors or any of that stuff you always tried to teach me." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Well," I said, "that sounds like a problem that requires some old-fashioned resourcefulness. Why don't you come over and we'll figure it out together?" That night we sat at my kitchen table with his budget spread out like a battle plan. I showed him how to separate needs from wants, how to negotiate with creditors, how to find dignity in taking any honest work while looking for the right opportunity. "Your generation thinks there's shame in taking a step back," I said, "but sometimes you have to retreat in order to advance. There's no shame in survival, only in giving up." Marcus took a job at a local restaurant while he looked for something in his field. He was embarrassed at first, worried about what Stephanie and his former colleagues would think about him waiting tables and washing dishes. But something beautiful happened. He started to remember who he was before he got caught up in who he thought he should be. He learned to take pride in making an honest living, to find satisfaction in doing simple work well, to appreciate the dignity that comes from earning your pay with your own hands. The restaurant job taught him things his business degree never could. He learned to read people quickly, to anticipate needs, to solve problems on the fly. He discovered that the kitchen staff, mostly immigrants working multiple jobs to support their families, had a work ethic that put his former corporate colleagues to shame. "They never complain," he told me one evening, exhausted but oddly satisfied after a double shift. "They just do what needs to be done." 3 months later he came to dinner with news. He'd been offered a position at a smaller company, one that focused on helping local businesses rather than disrupting entire industries. The pay was less than his previous job, but the work felt meaningful. "I think I want to take it," he said. "But I wanted to ask your opinion first." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years: contentment. The frantic ambition had been replaced by something steadier, more sustainable. "What do you think?" I asked, turning the question back on him the way I used to when he was little and needed to learn to trust his own judgment. "I think I've learned that success isn't just about climbing ladders. Sometimes it's about building something worth climbing toward. This company helps family businesses stay competitive. They value experience and relationships, not just quarterly profits. It feels like somewhere I could do good work." The biggest surprise came when Marcus broke up with Stephanie. "She couldn't understand why I'd take a lower-paying job," he explained. "She said I was moving backwards, throwing away my potential. But I realized that someone who can't respect the values that built me isn't someone I want to build a future with." I didn't say, "I told you so," though every maternal instinct wanted to. Instead, I just hugged him and said I was proud of him for choosing his principles over his fears. 6 months later, Marcus brought home a different kind of girlfriend. Sarah was a teacher, quiet and thoughtful, someone who lit up when he told her about learning to cook from his grandmother's recipes. At Sunday dinner, she asked if I'd teach her how to make my cornbread. "I'd love to learn from someone who's perfected it," she said. "My grandmother died before she could pass down her recipes, and I've always regretted that." I saw Marcus smile, the kind of smile that reaches all the way to your eyes. As I watched Marcus and Sarah work together in my kitchen, laughing over a failed attempt at pie crust, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The satisfaction of watching seeds you planted finally grow into something beautiful. This was what I'd been trying to give Marcus all along. Not just skills, but the understanding that love expresses itself through service, that wisdom flows backward and forward through generations like a river, that there's no expiration date on the things that really matter. A year later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Sunday dinner, but everything looked different now. Marcus was at the counter, teaching Sarah how to season the green beans the way his great-grandmother had taught me 60 years ago. She listened carefully, asking questions about technique and tradition, treating each instruction like the precious gift it was. In the living room, Kevin from next door was helping set the table, chattering about his improved grades and his plans for high school. The house was full of voices and laughter and the kind of love that feeds itself by being shared. This is what I'd been trying to give Marcus all along. Not just recipes and household tips, but the understanding that wisdom doesn't expire just because the world changes around it. That respecting your elders isn't about blindly following old rules, but about recognizing that some truths are timeless because they're built on love, experience, and the genuine desire to see others succeed. He'd learned that modern doesn't mean better, just like old doesn't mean obsolete. The best way forward often requires understanding where you came from. Marcus had discovered that there's no shame in needing your mother's guidance, no matter how old you get or how successful you become. He'd learned to distinguish between traditions worth preserving and habits worth changing. Most importantly, he'd remembered that being a good person never goes out of style, even in a world that sometimes seems to value cleverness over character. As we sat down to dinner that Sunday, Marcus raised his glass of sweet tea. "To Mama," he said, "who taught me that some things never expire. Love, wisdom, and the patience to keep teaching even when your students think they know everything." Sarah and Kevin raised their glasses too, and I felt my heart swell with the kind of pride that has nothing to do with accomplishments and everything to do with love freely given and finally received. "To family," I said, raising my own glass, "where the best lessons are always served with dinner, and there's always room for one more at the table." That night, as I cleaned up the dishes with help from 3 generations gathered around my sink, I thought about the woman who'd sat in this same kitchen a year ago, wondering if she'd become obsolete in her own son's life. She hadn't expired. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to bloom again. Some things truly never go out of style. The value of hard work, the importance of treating people with dignity, the power of a home-cooked meal to heal relationships, and the irreplaceable worth of a mother's love. I'd raised my son to be successful, but I'd had to teach him the difference between success and meaning. The lesson took longer than I'd hoped, but it took exactly as long as it needed to. And now, watching him pass those same lessons on to Sarah, I knew they'd last another generation.